My name is Maya Cole. I was 21 years old, and the world had decided it was done with me. The eviction notice felt like a formal declaration of this fact, a crisp, legal document confirming my failure. It was taped to the door of my tiny apartment, the paper already curling in the humid afternoon air. I had stared at it for a full minute, not with anger or even surprise, but with a profound and hollow sense of resignation. It was the final domino in a long, wobbly line that had been waiting to fall ever since I had aged out of the system. Without family to fall back on, every stumble felt like a plunge into a chasm. This time, I could not see the bottom. It was in this state of quiet desperation, sitting on the floor of my nearly empty apartment with my life packed into 2 cardboard boxes, that the phone had rung. It was a lawyer I had never heard of, from a town I could not place on a map, telling me my great-uncle Silas had passed away, and I was named in his will. The name barely registered. Silas Cole. I had a vague, sepia-toned memory of a tall, quiet man with calloused hands who had visited once when I was a small child. He had given me a silver dollar and told me to always look at how things were built, not just what they looked like. That was it. That was the sum total of my relationship with the man who was apparently my only living relative with anything to leave behind. I had assumed he was as poor as the rest of my forgotten family tree. The lawyer, a Mr. Thompson, had a dry, dusty voice that crackled over the phone line. He was polite, but firm. The reading was in 2 days. It was imperative that I attend. The cost of the bus ticket was more than I'd spent on food in the last week, but the alternative was waiting for the sheriff to throw my boxes onto the sidewalk. So I went. Mr. Thompson's office was not the grand mahogany-panelled chamber I had pictured from movies. It was a small, cramped space on the 2nd floor of a brick building that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight, cutting through the grimy window. The only other person in the room was Mr. Thompson himself, a man who seemed to be made of the same old paper as his files, thin and brittle, and rustling with every movement. There were no greedy cousins or sneering aunts. There was just me, in my worn-out jeans and a faded t-shirt, and the lawyer who looked at me with an unreadable expression that might have been pity. He cleared his throat and began to read. The legal language was dense, a thicket of herebys and wherefores, but the gist was simple. Silas Cole, being of sound mind and body, left his entire estate to his great-niece, Maya Cole. My heart gave a pathetic little flutter of hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the miracle, the lifeline I had been praying for. Maybe there was a small house, a savings account, anything to stop the freefall. To my great-niece, Maya Cole, Mr. Thompson read, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, I bequeath the entirety of my real property holdings, to wit, 40 acres of unimproved land located in Nye County, Nevada, together with one concrete structure thereupon, designated as Parcel 7-34-B. He paused, looking at me over the top of his spectacles. I waited. Surely there was more. A bank account, a stock portfolio, something to pay the taxes on 40 acres of, what? Unimproved land. That is the entirety of the estate, he said softly. He slid a thick manila envelope across the polished surface of his desk. The deed is in here, along with a topographical map and the keys to the structure. There is also a small sealed envelope that my client instructed me to give you directly. I stared at the envelope. 40 acres. It sounded impressive, but I knew enough to know that 40 acres of nothing in the middle of the Nevada desert was, in fact, nothing. Less than nothing. You should also be aware, Mr. Thompson continued, his tone becoming even more gentle, which only made it worse, that there is an outstanding property tax lien on the parcel. 3 years' worth. It amounts to $842. If it is not paid within 90 days, the county will seize the land and auction it off. The tiny flutter of hope in my chest crumpled into a cold, heavy stone. $842. He might as well have said $1 million. It was a debt. He had not left me an inheritance. He had left me a bill. A cruel cosmic joke played on a girl who could not afford to be the punchline. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck, a bitter wave of humiliation. I was being evicted because I was $200 short on rent, and now I owed 4 times that on a patch of dirt I had never seen. I reached out and took the large envelope. My hand was steady, a small miracle. I would not give this stranger, this bearer of bad news, the satisfaction of seeing me break. I was an expert at holding it together. My entire life had been a masterclass in it. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," I said, my voice surprisingly even. He gave me a long, searching look. "Your great-uncle was a particular man," he said, as if that explained everything. He was very specific in his instructions. I nodded, tucking the envelope under my arm. I did not care how particular he was. I cared that he had dragged me halfway across the state on my last few dollars to hand me a burden wrapped in legal paper. I stood up, the old wooden chair groaning in protest. "Is there anything else?" I asked. "No, Miss Cole. That is all." I walked out of that dusty office, down the creaking stairs, and back into the oppressive heat of the street. I did not cry. I did not rage. I just walked, the heavy envelope a tangible reminder of my own foolishness for ever allowing myself to hope. The universe was not laughing at me. It was not even paying attention. I was just a girl with 2 cardboard boxes, an eviction notice, and a brand new deed to nowhere. The journey to Nye County was an exercise in self-punishment. I spent the last of my money on a tank of gas, a jug of water, and a bag of stale pretzels. My car, a rust-pocked sedan that wheezed on even the slightest incline, protested the whole way. The city gave way to suburbs, then to farmland, and then, finally, to the vast, empty expanse of the desert. The highway stretched out before me like a black ribbon laid across a canvas of brown and ochre. The heat was a physical presence, pressing in through the windows, making the air thick and hard to breathe. I followed the map Mr. Thompson had given me, turning off the main highway onto a state road, then onto a county road, and finally onto a dirt track that was little more than 2 ruts carved into the cracked earth. A plume of fine, pale dust trailed behind me like a ghost. The map said I had arrived, but all I could see was more of the same. Endless, flat land dotted with sagebrush and skeletal-looking creosote bushes. The sun beat down with a merciless intensity, bleaching the color from the sky. And then I saw it. About 100 yards off the track, a low, grey shape squatted in the landscape. The concrete structure. It was smaller than I had imagined. A windowless, featureless block of brutalist architecture dropped into the middle of nowhere. It looked less like a building and more like a tombstone. I pulled the car over and got out. The silence was absolute, broken only by the ticking of my cooling engine and the faint whisper of the wind. I walked towards the bunker, my boots crunching on the gravelly soil. Up close, it was even uglier. The concrete was stained and weathered, cracked in places. A heavy, rust-streaked steel door was set into one side, looking like it had not been opened in decades. This was my inheritance. 40 acres of baked dirt and a concrete box that probably housed more scorpions than secrets. I walked the perimeter of the property, a meaningless gesture. The four corners were marked by rusted metal stakes. It was a perfect square of desolation. I had no professional skills in architecture or land surveying, but I had a lifetime of experience in recognizing hopelessness. This was it. The cost of paying the back taxes, of getting the land surveyed, of trying to find a buyer for a remote, inaccessible plot with no water, no power, and no redeeming features, was astronomical. It was a financial black hole, and I was standing on the event horizon. I climbed onto the hood of my car, the metal hot enough to burn through my jeans, and just sat there staring at the bunker. This was the bottom of the chasm. The despair I had been holding at bay since the eviction notice finally washed over me. It was a cold, heavy tide, pulling me under. My great-uncle had not just left me a burden. He had left me a monument to my own failure. A 40-acre testament to the fact that I was completely and utterly alone. I considered just getting back in the car, driving away, and letting the county take the land. I could tear up the deed, forget Silas Cole and his cruel joke, and just disappear. The thought was tempting. It felt like giving up, but it also felt like freedom. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching the sun crawl across the sky, until a flicker of movement on the dirt track caught my eye. A cloud of dust was approaching, far larger than the one my own car had made. A sleek, black SUV, the kind that belonged in a city garage, not on a desert trail, was bouncing its way towards me. It seemed to suck all the light and colour from the landscape, an obsidian beetle crawling across the sand. The SUV pulled to a stop about 20 feet away, and a man got out. He was tall, dressed in an expensive-looking linen suit that was already starting to wilt in the heat. He had silver hair, a tanned face, and the kind of predatory smile that sets alarm bells ringing. He looked completely and utterly out of place. "Miss Cole," he called out, his voice smooth and confident. "Maya Cole?" I slid off the hood of my car, my senses suddenly on high alert. How did he know my name? How did he even know I was here? "I am," I said, my voice raspy from the dust and disuse. "My name is Arthur Sterling," he said, walking towards me with an outstretched hand. I did not take it. "I'm a land developer. I was sorry to hear about your great-uncle's passing. Silas was an old acquaintance of my family." This was the first anomaly. Silas was a recluse. An old acquaintance? It seemed unlikely. "I'll get right to the point, Miss Cole. I'm interested in this parcel. My company is acquiring land in the area for a large-scale solar farm project. This is one of the last pieces we need to complete the grid." He gestured vaguely at the empty horizon. I raised an eyebrow. "A solar farm? Out here?" "The intensity of the sun is perfect," he said, his smile never wavering. "Look, I know this place isn't much to look at. Frankly, it's worthless to just about anyone, but to me, it has a certain positional value. I am prepared to offer you $10,000 for the deed. Cash? We can have the paperwork drawn up today." $10,000. The number hung in the air between us. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It would solve everything. It would pay for a new apartment, a security deposit, food, everything. It was the lifeline I had been praying for, handed to me by a man in a fancy suit. It was too good to be true. And that was the second anomaly. Why $10,000 for worthless land? He could have offered $1,000, and I would have been tempted. He could have just waited 91 days and bought it from the county for a fraction of that price. His offer was too high. His eagerness was too pronounced. He did not want the land. He wanted what was on it, or, more precisely, what he thought might be in it. A tiny spark of defiance flickered to life within me, the first real emotion I had felt besides despair. My great-uncle was a particular man, Mr. Thompson had said. He did not seem like the type to play a joke without a punchline. Maybe this was it. "I'm not interested in selling," I said. The word surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. Sterling's smile tightened at the edges. "Miss Cole, I think you misunderstand. This is a very generous offer. This land has a tax lien against it. It has no water rights. The cost to you will far exceed its value. I'm doing you a favor." "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Sterling, but I'd like to take some time to evaluate my inheritance before making any decisions." His eyes narrowed. He looked from me to the concrete bunker and back again. A flash of something, frustration, greed, crossed his face before he masked it with a veneer of polite condescension. "As you wish," he said stiffly. He pulled a business card from his jacket pocket and held it out. "The offer stands, for a little while. Don't take too long to come to your senses." I took the card. He gave a curt nod, turned on his heel, and got back into his air-conditioned SUV. He drove away, leaving me in a cloud of dust and a swirl of new questions. His desperation was the clue. He was not a developer. He was a scavenger. And he thought there was something here worth scavenging for. For the first time, I looked at the ugly concrete bunker not as a burden, but as a puzzle. I waited until Sterling's dust cloud was a faint smudge on the horizon before I turned my attention back to the bunker. His visit had changed everything. The oppressive weight of despair had been replaced by a thrumming, nervous energy. I was no longer a victim of a cruel joke. I was a participant in a game I did not understand. I slid the key from the envelope Mr. Thompson had given me. It was old, heavy iron, the kind you see in fairy tales. It fit the lock on the steel door. With a great deal of effort, putting my whole body into it, I managed to turn the key. The lock made a horrible groaning sound. The door itself was the next challenge. It was unbelievably heavy, and the hinges were fused with rust. I had to use my tire iron as a lever, jamming it into the crack and pulling with all my might. Slowly, painfully, the door scraped open, revealing a dark, square opening. The air that rushed out was stale and musty, thick with the smell of trapped heat and dry decay. I used the flashlight on my phone to peer inside. It was exactly what I had expected. An empty box. The room was about 20 feet by 20 feet, with bare concrete walls, a concrete floor, and a concrete ceiling. There was nothing in it. Not a single crate, not a piece of furniture, not even a stray piece of trash. It was utterly, disappointingly empty. This, I thought, must be the decoy. Sterling thought there was something buried here, and my uncle built this whole structure to look like a plausible but empty hiding place. A dead end. The flicker of hope I had felt began to dim. Maybe Sterling was just a strange man with a strange fixation. Maybe the land really was worthless. I stepped inside, the beam of my phone's light cutting through the gloom. I ran my hands along the walls, looking for seams, for cracks, for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing. I stamped my feet on the floor. It was solid, unyielding concrete. I felt a familiar wave of disappointment wash over me. I had let a slick stranger's odd behavior get my hopes up for nothing. Defeated, I slumped against a wall and slid to the floor. My hand brushed against the cool concrete, and I sat there in the dark, the silence of the bunker pressing in on me. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed the way the dust lay on the floor. It was a thick, uniform carpet, undisturbed for years, except not quite. Near the wall where I was sitting, close to the floor, the dust seemed thinner, as if it had been wiped or blown away at some point. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible difference. And then I remembered the second envelope, the small, sealed one. In the excitement and confusion of Sterling's visit, I had completely forgotten about it. I pulled the large manila envelope from my back pocket and fished inside, my fingers closing around the smaller, stiffer packet of paper. I tore it open. Inside was not a letter, not an explanation, just a single small piece of thick cardstock. On it was a typed string of numbers, no letters, no symbols, just a code. A code for what? The main door had a key. There were no other doors. I stood up, my phone's light scanning the walls again, this time with a specific purpose. I was not looking for a door. I was looking for a lock. I moved slowly, meticulously, running the beam of light over every square inch of the concrete. And then I found it. On the wall I had been leaning against, no more than a foot off the ground, almost completely obscured by shadows and a thin layer of caked-on dust, was a small, square metal plate. It was rusted and blended in almost perfectly with the mottled grey of the concrete. In the centre of the plate was a numeric keypad, the buttons worn and faded. It was so low to the ground, so cleverly concealed, that you would never find it unless you were on your hands and knees, actively searching. My heart began to pound, a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was it. This had to be it. I knelt on the dusty floor, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. I looked at the cardstock, then at the keypad. Carefully, one by one, I began to press the stiff, resistant buttons, punching in the long sequence of numbers. Each press was accompanied by a dull, unsatisfying click. When I pressed the last digit, nothing happened. For a heart-stopping second, I was sure I had been wrong again. The silence stretched, thick and mocking. The bunker remained an empty, concrete tomb. I felt a sob of frustration build in my throat. And then I heard it. A low hum, a deep mechanical vibration that seemed to come from the very ground beneath me. It was not loud, but I could feel it through the soles of my boots. A thin line appeared in the concrete floor, tracing the outline of a massive square in the center of the room. The hum grew into a low, powerful grinding sound, the sound of immense weight, being moved by machinery that had not been used in a very long time. Slowly, with a deep and resonant thump, the entire central section of the floor began to lower. It was not a door, it was an elevator. A hydraulic platform, 10 feet by 10 feet, was descending into a space I never knew existed, revealing a set of steep, brightly lit metal stairs leading down into the earth. The air that rose to meet me was completely different from the musty air of the bunker. It was cool, dry, and carried a faint, sterile scent, like a hospital or a laboratory. It smelled of machinery, of electricity, of preservation. I stood at the edge of the opening, peering down into the brightly lit shaft. The puzzle box had opened. Now I had to have the courage to see what was inside. Section 1. I took a deep breath. The cool, clean air a shocking contrast to the suffocating heat outside. My fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but my curiosity was a fire, burning brighter and hotter. I had come this far. I was not about to turn back now. Holding my phone in front of me like a talisman, I placed my foot on the top step of the metal staircase and began to descend. The stairs were steep and narrow, enclosed in a concrete shaft. With each step down, the sounds of the desert, the whisper of the wind, the distant cry of a hawk, faded away, replaced by the hum of ventilation and the echo of my own footsteps. The light grew brighter, coming from long fluorescent tubes recessed into the ceiling below. I reached the bottom and stepped out into a room that took my breath away. It was not a dusty cellar or a damp cave. It was a modern, climate-controlled storage facility. The room was huge, at least 4 times the size of the bunker above, with a high ceiling and smooth, polished concrete floors. The air was a constant, cool 65 degrees. This was not a hiding place. It was a vault. A meticulously engineered, perfectly preserved time capsule. Lining the walls were rows upon rows of heavy-duty industrial shelving, stretching from the floor to the ceiling. And on those shelves were hundreds of identical military-spec wooden crates, each stenciled with a series of numbers and letters. In the center of the room, standing alone under a cone of bright light, was a simple steel desk and a chair. On the desk sat a crowbar and a single thick manila envelope with my name, Maya Cole, typed neatly on the front. I walked towards the desk, my footsteps the only sound in the vast, silent room. I picked up the crowbar. It was heavy, solid steel. I turned to the nearest stack of crates, selected one at random, and jammed the forked end of the crowbar under the lid. It took some effort, but with a screech of protesting nails, the lid popped open. I peered inside. The crate was packed tightly with rectangular bars of a dull, grey-white metal. I reached in and lifted one out. It was shockingly heavy for its size, far heavier than it should have been. It was cool and smooth to the touch. Stamped into its surface were the words, 100 troy ounces, 0.999 fine silver. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. I put the bar down and moved to the next crate. I pried it open. It was also full of silver bars. I moved to a different stack, on the other side of the room. These crates were smaller, more compact. When I opened the first one, my breath caught in my throat. It was not filled with bars, but with canvas bags. I untied the drawstring on one and poured some of the contents into my palm. Gold coins, heavy, lustrous, beautiful gold coins, each one bearing the image of Lady Liberty and a date from before 1933. They felt like captured sunlight in my hand. I opened another bag, and another. They were all the same. I stumbled back, leaning against a shelf for support, and surveyed the room. There had to be hundreds of crates, thousands of silver bars, tens of thousands of gold coins. It was not a treasure. It was a fortune, a nation's ransom, hidden beneath a worthless patch of desert dirt. After a long time, I finally made my way to the desk. My hands were trembling as I picked up the envelope with my name on it. I sank into the cold metal chair and carefully tore it open. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written on a typewriter. The letterhead simply read, "From the desk of Silas Cole." "My dearest Maya," it began, "if you are reading this, it means several things. First, it means I am gone. I have no regrets on that front. I lived a long and full life. Second, it means you did not listen to the first fool who tried to buy this land from you. And third, it means you were clever enough and curious enough to look beyond the obvious and find what was hidden. For that, I am immensely proud. I imagine you have many questions. I will try to answer them. In the 1960s, I was not just a simple man. I was a logistics contractor for a series of highly classified government projects. My specialty was moving sensitive assets discreetly and securely. During one such project, my compensation was not in cash, but in bullion, directly from the United States Treasury Reserves. It was a perfectly legal, if unusual, arrangement. The contents of this vault represent the final payment for that contract. Unfortunately, my partner in the venture, a man named Franklin Sterling, saw an opportunity. He tried to cheat me. He falsified the shipping manifests, declared the shipment lost in transit, and planned to recover it himself later. He believed I had hidden it somewhere on this property, which we had purchased jointly as part of our cover. What he did not know was that I was one step ahead of him. I had already built this sublevel, and the shipment was never lost. It was exactly where I wanted it to be. My eyes widened as I read the name. Sterling. Franklin Sterling, the grandfather of Arthur Sterling, the man in the black SUV. It all clicked into place. This was not about a solar farm. This was a family grudge, a 50-year-old treasure hunt passed down from one generation of scavengers to the next. I could not go to the authorities. The letter continued. The nature of our work was too sensitive. To reveal his fraud would have been to reveal state secrets. So, I did the only thing I could. I waited. I knew the Sterling family would never forget. I knew they would watch this property, waiting for me to die, waiting for their chance to claim what they believed was theirs. I arranged my will specifically to trigger their attention, to draw them out. This was all a test, Maya, a test for you and a trap for them. I have watched you from afar for years. I saw you struggle. I saw you work 2 jobs to get through high school. I saw you face every hardship with a quiet strength that reminded me of your grandmother. I saw that you were not greedy. You were a builder, not a taker. I knew you would not simply sell this land for a quick profit. I knew you would see the puzzle. Inside this envelope, you will find all the necessary documentation. My original contract with the government, the true shipping manifests, and my sworn affidavit detailing Franklin Sterling's fraud. You will also find the name of a lawyer in Las Vegas. He is the only person you should trust. He will help you secure this fortune. It is all yours, legally and ethically. It is not treasure. It is a deferred payment for a job well done. It is your legacy. As for the Sterlings, the final paragraph read, their greed will be their undoing. When they try to lay claim to this land, which I am certain they will, these documents will not only prove your ownership of the assets below, but they will also expose their family's legacy of fraud for all to see. They will be ruined not by me, but by their own avarice. I finished the letter and let the pages fall to the desk. I looked around the vault, at the crates of silver and gold, no longer with shock, but with a sense of profound, earth-shattering clarity. It was not a joke. It was a master plan. A long, slow-burning fuse lit half a century ago, and I, Maya Cole, broke and evicted, and 21 years old, had just been handed the match. The drive back to civilization was a blur. I left the vault exactly as I had found it, carefully closing the hydraulic floor and locking the heavy steel door of the bunker behind me. The desert no longer looked empty or desolate. It looked like a guardian, a silent keeper of an incredible secret. My beat-up car, which had felt like a symbol of my failure, now felt like a getaway vehicle. I was not running from my problems anymore. I was driving towards the solution. I stopped at the first town with cell service and called the lawyer my uncle's letter had recommended. His name was Mr. Davies, and when I mentioned Silas Cole, his tone changed from professional courtesy to immediate, focused attention. He listened patiently as I explained the situation, my voice trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and disbelief. He did not sound surprised. He simply said, "I've been waiting for this call for 20 years. Do not go back to the property. Do not speak to anyone. Drive to my office in Las Vegas. We have work to do." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of controlled, methodical action. Mr. Davies was the opposite of the small-town lawyer. He was sharp, efficient, and commanded a team of experts. Within 24 hours, a discreet security team had been dispatched to the Nevada property, establishing a perimeter. An independent firm specializing in precious metals was hired to inventory, and appraised the contents of the vault. Armored trucks, the kind you see servicing banks, made a series of quiet, late-night trips into the desert. I watched, mostly in silence, as my inheritance was transformed from a tangible hoard into abstract figures on a ledger. The numbers were staggering, beyond anything I could have imagined. The silver bullion alone was worth a fortune. The pre-1933 gold coins, with their numismatic value, were worth even more. Mr. Davies handled everything. He established trusts, created a diversified investment portfolio, and set aside a significant amount to cover the immense tax liabilities. My first act of financial freedom was small but deeply satisfying. I wrote a check to Nye County for $842, paying off the tax lien with an almost comical amount of ease. My second act was to find a quiet, comfortable apartment in a new city, a place where the landlord did not know my name and the locks were new. I threw away the eviction notice. I bought new clothes. For the first time in my life, I felt the ground beneath my feet. I was not falling anymore. I was secure. Meanwhile, just as my great-uncle had predicted, Arthur Sterling was getting desperate. He must have seen the security presence on the property and panicked. He called me, his voice no longer smooth and confident, but sharp and demanding. He doubled his offer, then tripled it. When I politely declined through my lawyer, his tone turned nasty. He made threats, not of violence, but of legal warfare. He claimed his family had a prior claim to the land, an old deed that superseded my own. He filed a lawsuit. It was an aggressive, baseless claim, full of fabricated stories about a supposed business partnership and a handshake deal between his grandfather and mine. He was trying to bury me in legal fees, to bully me into giving up the land he so desperately wanted. It was the trap, and he had walked right into it. The court hearing was a quiet, formal affair in a judge's chambers. Arthur Sterling was there with a team of slick, expensive lawyers. He looked confident, smug, as if this was merely a formality. I sat beside Mr. Davies, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Sterling's lawyer presented their case, spinning a tale of my great-uncle as a senile old eccentric who had taken advantage of their family's friendship. Then it was Mr. Davies's turn. He did not argue or shout. He simply walked to the judge's bench and presented a single leather-bound portfolio. "Your Honour," he said, his voice calm and clear. "This portfolio contains the original, fully executed government contract from 1968, the official Treasury shipping manifests for the assets in question, and a sworn, notarized affidavit from the late Silas Cole, detailing the attempt by Franklin Sterling to defraud both him and the United States government by falsifying federal documents." A thick silence fell over the room. Arthur Sterling's face went pale. His lawyers began to whisper frantically to one another. Mr. Davies continued. "The inheritance left to my client, Miss Cole, was not the land itself, but the contents of a secure facility located upon it, which constituted a long-deferred payment for services rendered. Mr. Sterling's claim is not only meritless, but it appears to be a continuation of his family's decades-long attempt to illegally seize these assets." The judge spent a long time reading the documents. When he finally looked up, his expression was grim. He dismissed Sterling's lawsuit with prejudice, meaning he could never file it again. But he went further. He recommended the district attorney's office open an investigation into the Sterling family for potential conspiracy and fraud based on the evidence presented. Arthur Sterling's ruin was not a dramatic, front-page collapse. It was a quiet, thorough dismantling. His family's name, once a source of pride, was now permanently linked to theft and deceit in the public record. His credit lines dried up. His business partners distanced themselves. He had gambled everything on a ghost story and lost. I saw him one last time, a few days after the hearing. I was leaving Mr. Davies's office building, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun, when he appeared in front of me. He looked smaller, diminished. His expensive suit was rumpled. His face was drawn and sallow. The predatory smile was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed desperation. "You," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You set me up." "I did not do anything," I replied, my voice steady. "I just accepted my inheritance." "That was my family's legacy," he said, his voice rising. "My grandfather worked for that. You stole it from me." He was incapable of seeing the truth, blinded by a lifetime of entitlement. He truly believed the story he had been told, that his family were the victims. He took a step closer, his arrogance making a brief, pathetic reappearance. "Look," he said, trying to lower his voice into a conspiratorial tone. "This doesn't have to be public. We can still make a deal, a percentage, a finder's fee, just enough to help me salvage my reputation. Nobody needs to know the details." I looked at this man, this grasping, pathetic echo of his thieving grandfather, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sympathy, not even the satisfaction of victory, just a cold, clear pity. He had spent his life chasing a prize he did not deserve, and now that it was gone, he had nothing left. "My great-uncle was a builder, Mr. Sterling," I said quietly. "He built things to last. Your grandfather was a taker. He tried to take something that did not belong to him. You cannot inherit a theft and call it a legacy." I took a step to the side to walk around him. "What about the land?" he asked, his voice cracking. "What are you going to do with it?" I paused and looked back at him. This man who had dismissed me, patronized me, and tried to swindle me out of my future. I gave him the same dismissive, condescending smile he had given me in the desert. "It's just worthless desert dirt, Mr. Sterling," I said, using his own words. "It's a shame you went to so much trouble for it." Then I turned my back on him for the last time. I did not walk away to a restored mansion or a fancy sports car. I just walked, one foot in front of the other, down the busy city street. The sun was warm on my face. The door I was closing was not made of steel or wood. It was the door to my past, to a life of poverty and fear and desperation. And the future I was walking towards was one I would build myself, on a foundation of silver and gold, laid for me by a particular man I had barely known, but who had, in the end, saved my life.